Can you prove God exists? Like, genuinely, can you go ahead and prove to me that God is real? I'm waiting. Now, I'm not going to shame any other religions for either trying to prove or not being able to prove it, because at the end of the day, you really can't prove God exists. It's all about faith. I just want to know, when people try to prove God exists, what is going through their mind? So I'm not going to mention the channel, but I made this video recently called "Who is Jesus to a Non-Christian?" Me, the non-Christian. But basically, this guy said, what would make you believe in Christianity? I said, probably seeing a sign or God himself. And he says, would you also not believe George Washington existed since you never see him? And I said, but there's proof he existed. He was the first president, and it's a lot easier to prove the existence of the very first president than to prove God exists. They also have personal diaries he wrote, financial records, documents that prove he existed. There is 77,000 pieces of undisputable evidence of the existence of George Washington. He goes ahead and says, but I thought you said you would only believe if you saw him. I would believe in God if I was given a sign of his existence or saw him myself. There is undoubtedly no single evidence of his existence. I'm not saying I don't believe in him fully, but what I'm saying is that I will never know of God's existence until I die. He says, if you're trying to find 100% proof that you're never going to find it, we don't base our lives off of proof, but off evidence. It shows that this is more likely than that. If you want, I can show you evidence on why God exists, my friend. And I got a little, I shouldn't have said it this way, but I said, if you quote the Bible, I'm not responding. Because, again, you can't really prove God exists by quoting the Bible. Now, I was going to talk St. Thomas Aquinas' 5 proofs of God. I was also going to say that the Acts of Apostle prove Jesus was God because they were all brutally tortured for their belief in Jesus. I don't think, keep in mind, keyword think, I don't think anyone would die for a lie. Keep that in mind. I was going to talk about modern day miracles such as Our Lady of Guadalupe and the chances of so happening. And I responded respectfully, I'm glad you didn't reference the Bible, but how is anything you said proof of God's existence? You say you don't think someone would die for a lie, but a lot of people would most certainly die for something they truly believe in, especially religion. That doesn't prove God exists. That just shows that people who believe in God and believe in Jesus are so loyal that they would die for them, which is okay. But then you bring up modern day miracles, but there is no way to prove that they were actually true miracles. He says, first you compare modern day martyrs to the apostles' martyrs. I don't think I compared them specifically. I'm saying humans in general. There are definitely people, humans in general, that will die for something they truly believe in. That's just a fact. That is proven to be a fact. If you truly believe in something and someone's going to kill you if you don't tell them the opposite, I feel like a lot of people would die. And I'm saying I feel like that, but it is proven that has happened. A lot of people have died over something that also could not be true, but they believe it is. Like, for example, Nazi Germany. I'm not going to bring that up as an example, but people believed in Hitler, people believed his ideologies, and they died for that. They died in the name of Hitler. Again, that's not a good comparison, it's just an example. That would not be a good comparison because the apostles actually saw Jesus and could have seen him do a lot of miracles, and if they thought he was a false messiah, they would have just left him. I am going to say that seeing Jesus, like knowing Jesus in person and seeing him do miracles, could also just be they're lying. You never know, because we're basing information from 2,000 plus years ago of people that knew Jesus and saw him do miracles, but you don't know if they saw him do miracles. For all you know, the Bible could have been written by a man who claimed to have seen Jesus do miracles when it just could have not been true. We also know the apostles were not all loyal to Jesus, as you said, because we know some did not believe he was the Messiah since he died, but then when they saw Jesus resurrected, they believed with all their hearts Jesus was the Messiah. But that's the point I'm making. You don't know if they actually saw Jesus resurrect. That could just be people making claims that aren't true. He also said that modern miracles can't be proven. That would be false, since when we look at Our Lady of Guadalupe, we see that there are no paintbrush marks on it. We could also look at Eucharistic miracles, which turned into blood and flesh. These miracles were studied by many atheist scientists, and they could not find how they could have done this. Now, I actually did research on this topic. Our Lady of Guadalupe is a revered Catholic title of the Virgin Mary associated with 1531 apparitions to Saint Juan Diego on Tepeyac, correct me if I'm wrong pronouncing that, hill, Mexico City. She appeared as a young indigenous maiden, leaving her image on Juan Diego's tilma, cloak, which is considered miraculous due to its preservation and symbolism, and she is the patron saint of the Americas. So this commenter claimed that there were no paintbrush marks on the painting. That is correct. And it is entirely possible to make a painting without paintbrush marks. And I also did research on that. Because you can use techniques like thinning paints, adding multiple thin layers of glaze, using softer bristled brushes, which is another way. And also scientists have proven that to actually be able to do this, they just did it on an entirely smaller scale. So if you think about the time that people have now versus the time they had back then to make a painting, obviously they're going to have a lot more time back then because there's not a lot of responsibilities back then other than get food, grow crops, and then have free time for the rest of the time. And that's just speculation based on the responsibilities that we have today versus what was available back then. And yeah, it is entirely possible to make a painting like that without showing any paintbrush strokes. And then he brings up Eucharistic miracles, which is where priests would physically turn wine and bread into human flesh, which seems weird if you think about it. So I did a lot of research. There isn't a lot of documents talking about this. There were over 100 documented cases in the entire history. So that's not a lot if you think about it. And some of which the Catholic, and it says some of which the Catholic Church recognizes as authentic. And I'm thinking, like, of course a Catholic Church would recognize this as authentic because it's the church. They believe in it. But there is no scientific evidence that this was real. This could have obviously been fabricated. We have like modern day magicians doing this on a daily basis. It's called an illusion. So you can very well make this an illusion. I wouldn't say this is direct evidence of the existence of God based on a miracle. And he says these miracles were studied by many atheist scientists and they cannot find how this could have happened. Yeah, that's very possible that they could not find how this could have happened. Because we're talking about like years ago, decades ago, where atheist scientists were trying to discover how this happened. Of course, they wouldn't discover it. They could have just not discovered it altogether. That doesn't mean that they proved it right. It just means they couldn't prove it wrong. There's a difference. That's not direct evidence of the existence of God. I told him that I would love to have him in a video so we can debate this further. I love debating Christians only because as a non-Christian myself, I like to see the other side and what people are thinking about all of this, because obviously I don't believe in anything the Bible says miracle-wise or like Jesus-wise. Like, I don't believe in God. I believe in the morals that they give off, at least most of them, but I don't believe anything that was said about God and Jesus in the Bible. And that's just my opinion. You can believe whatever you want. And when I say I don't believe in God, it doesn't mean I'm like an atheist. Again, there's nothing wrong with being an atheist, but I'm agnostic, which means I don't believe in the God that is depicted in the Bible. I believe that it is possible, very well possible, that we have some kind of higher power when we die looking over us and all that, just like God does, but I don't believe in this specific God, and there's no way to prove it, and we'll never know. I want you guys to tell me what you think, because I really do find this a very interesting topic, but I want you to tell me if you genuinely think that you can prove God exists. I want you to give me evidence, because and there's a rule for this. You're not allowed to quote scriptures from the Bible, because I hate when people do that. They always say, well, I can prove God exists. So here you go in Matthew's 20 whatever, it shows that Jesus performed miracles. I'm like, but that's not proof. It tells you on a piece of paper that this happened, but that's not direct evidence. That would be like me claiming to have resurrected Jesus, and instead of recording a video or like recording audio of me doing an interview with him, I just write a book about me explaining how I resurrected Jesus. It doesn't work out. It's not valid evidence for the court of law. You know, that's what I want. I want evidence that would actually work in the court of law, that would actually be suitable in the court of law. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you guys subscribe, leave a like, and leave some nice in the comments below. Check out my Discord if you want to talk to me one-on-one about this topic. If you want to be in a video, send me a DM on Discord. Friend me on Discord, send me a DM on Instagram, whatever. But thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.